All right, cool. Mic wasn't on. All right, if you're watching this later on the playback, then we are. Yeah, we are up and going. So, breaking news that came out this morning is that apparently Wes Huff announced that Joe Rogan is now attending a non-denominational church. Now, I have nothing really to go off of besides the headlines, so I feel like today what we'll do is we'll actually go into the details together, see what kind of information we can dig up in a short amount of time. So let's get going on that. Let me pull this over here real quick. All right. So, this news today about Joe Rogan. I think I'd read this quote from him before. The resurrection of Jesus more plausible than the Big Bang Theory. I think we've read into that before. Stuff from Guy Fieri. More political stuff. Here we go from the Christian Post. So if y'all don't remember Wes Huff was a guest that Joe Rogan had on his show. He was a Christian apologist, and the reason he had him on is because he had a anti-Christian. I don't even know you call him anti-Christian, but just kind of a hokey guy that came on. I'm trying to remember the guy's name that we had on, but basically the guy talked about a lot of biblical criticism about why the Bible isn't real, about why Christians get all this stuff wrong. I've never watched his full interview with him, but then he had Wes Huff on as a response because Wes Huff got a following from reacting to Joe Rogan clips of people criticizing the Bible. And Wes Huffman is what some of us would call an apologist. Some of us would say he's just a top-notch biblical scholar. And so they had an expert in documents and ancient documents. And so Joe had him on to talk about his stuff. And Wes was actually able to give a presentation of the Bible, where it came from, the history of it, the history of the documents, and he did a very incredible job. And I think even had some really cool moments of discussing the gospel with Joe. And so I want to read this article here. Joe Rogan is attending church consistently, Christian apologist Wes Huff reveals. Not Wes Huffman, Wes Huff. Joe Rogan, the nation's most prominent podcaster and frequent commentator on Live Speaker's Questions, is consistently attending church. Christian apologist Wesley Huff has revealed. I wonder if Wesley Huff likes being called an apologist. I guess he does. He's part of Apologetics Canada. I can tell you that for a fact he is attending church and that he has been a consistent thing. Huff, who is a Central Canada director for Apologists, said during a recent appearance on Apologetics Canada. Huff, who joined Rogan's show, The Joe Rogan Experience, for a 3-hour discussion. 3 hours is a lot. About Christianity and the Bible in January, said Joe Rogan and I have had an on and off again communication since then. I can tell you for a fact that he's attending church and that has been a consistent thing. And so things are happening, he continued, and he's very inquisitive individual, and I think for the better in communicating with people and other people in his life who are influences that can speak into, these issues of reliability, trustworthiness, and I don't even know what that is. Something like in the pages of scripture where he should and shouldn't be looking for information in regards to that. Okay. Well, it's nice to know he still has a lot of contact with him, and that is a huge, discovery for many people who are very interested in the faith journey of Joe Rogan. It's one of the most trending topics consistently on the internet. It is one of the most trending topics consistently on the internet that Joe Rogan, talks about Christianity. Even though, he's very much denied it at points and been very open to, how would you say, very open to any criticism about Christianity. He there's always been this interest in this thought around the internet and around a lot of evangelicals that he was learning and getting deeper into the faith. Huff says he's very encouraged by his communication with Rogan over the last few months, adding, "We're seeing what I don't think is an exaggeration to say of somewhat resurgence in interest in these topics that we've been talking about, even the nitty-gritty." The apologist, who had recently appeared on the comedian Andrew Schultz podcast, really good podcast, by the way, cited examples of young people increasingly showing interest in the Bible. He stood his ground that show. They were really giving it to him at some points. We had someone who reached out to us recently at Apologetics Canada, who is probably the last bricks and mortar Christian bookstore that I've ever heard of. We have quite a few of them here, Wes, but I understand. We have people walking through our doors asking young people, teenagers, saying, "I want a Bible. All of my friends are reading this thing." So this isn't the Bible, becoming popular with teenagers. Then, yeah, something is happening and the Lord is moving, Huff said. Huff's comments come amid a new Gallup report revealing that after years of steady decline, the religious makeup of the U.S. has leveled off. The percentage of Americans identifying a Christian, affiliated, or becoming another tradition has remained largely unchanged over the last 5 years. Rogan, who has long used his platform to explore life's big questions, recently expressed skepticism about the Big Bang Theory and said that he finds the resurrection of Jesus more realistic than the belief the universe created itself out of nothing. During a May 7 conversation with comedy podcast host Cody Tucker, Rogan said he is sticking with Jesus when it comes to miraculous claims. So that's interesting. I want to go back to that in a moment and read that interview. It's funny because people will be incredulous about the resurrection of Jesus, but yet they're convinced that an entire universe was smaller than the head of a pin and that for no reason anyone had adequately explained to me instantaneously became everything. Joe Rogan's podcast consistently ranks at the top of Spotify's charts and has been the number one podcast platform since 2020. Raised Roman Catholic, Joe has called himself agnostic, but is increasingly engaged in conversations about faith Christianity in his podcast. Discussing the origins of the universe, Rogan questioned whether the notion of nothing ever truly existing makes logical sense. Wouldn't it be crazy if there wasn't something at one point in time, he said. It seems even crazier that there has always been something. There couldn't be nothing, and then all of a sudden, everything. Tucker suggested that the universe might have required an outside force set in motion, prompting Rogan to reference the late ethnobotanist Terence McKenna. Rogan cited McKenna's famous line as quoted in Rupert Sheldrake's book Morphic Renaissance, that modern science is based on the principle, give us one free miracle, and we'll explain the rest. Haven't heard that one before. That's McKenna's great line, Rogan said. The difference between science and religion is that science only asks you to believe in one miracle, the big bang. I'm sticking with Jesus on that one. Jesus makes more sense. People have come back to life. I'd like to hear the context behind it. In the conversation with musician Kid Rock in 2023, Rogan said, "I think the concept of Jesus is absolutely amazing, and if Jesus came here and wanted to visit me, I would be psyched." Jesus on the Joe Rogan Experience. In a conversation in March, Rogan and the former University of Kentucky swimmer Riley Gaines discussed Satan, Jesus, biblical prophecy, and the role transgenderism plays in moral decline of society. Gaines told Rogan that while society is clearly in moral decline, she finds solace in the fact that as a Christian, she is confident in the outcome, knowing how this all ends. Really trusting that and having faith in that and just knowing my battle's already won, that's certainly what keeps me grounded and what keeps a smile on my face and incredibly light heart, even when these crazy freaks at San Francisco are ruining me. She said, "The first thing I do is pray to them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you look miserable. I can't imagine having that much hatred in my heart." So I think of all those things that made me a little different, the combination of those things set me apart from my peers. It really ends with like just a Riley Gaines discussion. That's interesting. All right, that's from the Christian Post. Pretty reputable, usually not anything too crazy that's on there. So I actually want to look up this interview that they're referencing here. What is it? Cody Tucker. Okay. So let's go to YouTube. Cody Tucker, Joe Rogan, Jesus. So I guess it was on the Joe Rogan Experience. So here's the short. I just didn't see this.
Yeah. That one.
Like, Jesus makes more sense. The difference between science and religion is that science only asks you for one miracle. I want you to believe in one miracle, the Big Bang.
Yeah.
It's because it really is true. Yes. And it's funny because people would be incredulous about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but yet they're convinced that the entire universe was smaller than the head of a pin, and for no reason than anybody's adequately explained to me. Makes sense.
Yeah. No.
Instantaneously became everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't buy that.
I'm sticking with Jesus on that one.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus makes more sense. I'm sticking with Jesus.
Yeah. I think I heard that one before. All right, that is kind of a crazy line to come from someone who's like a hardcore agnostic. I wonder if he's going to have Neil deGrasse Tyson on soon. He's kind of a prominent atheist. I think he believes in the Big Bang. I think it'd be interesting to see what he had to say about that.
How about that dude that ate that guy's heart?
Yeah, he ate King Louis XIV.
Very next clip. This is the most Joe Rogan clip ever. So all of these are about that. And, of course, we have Michael Knowles talking on the subject. Let's see what this person has to say.
Rogan's unbelievable transformation throughout the years.
Because Christianity, at the end of the day, with no proof, everything is mythology.
I wonder what year that is.
The primary principles of Christianity, right? Do unto others as you would have done to you. They're easy to understand principles of like love and happiness and camaraderie. If you just follow those, they're really beneficial. They really work.
You think there's a real Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Absolutely. 1000%.
What makes you convinced?
My faith.
So you think the real truth was that he actually was the Son of God?
Yes.
It'd be amazing if it was true.
It is amazing.
I believe you. I believe that you believe that.
Would you like to be introduced to Jesus?
Listen, I think the concept of Jesus is absolutely amazing. And if Jesus came here and wanted to visit me, I would be psyched.
I pray that Joe would see the full truth about it.
So we kind of see where he's at. So the way Wesley Huff ended his interview with Joe Rogan was him saying, "So Joe, what do you think about Jesus?" And Joe kind of gave an answer similar to this at the time. He loves the concept. He loves a lot of the teachings and the core principles and values of the Bible. But, he wasn't at a point where he's ready to, go full into, belief about maybe the resurrection, the miracles, especially, being an agnostic. It means some of this, it's hard for us to understand as evangelicals when we've grown up our whole lives in this, but it's hard jump. You have to go from the jump of agnostic to believing in a God, and then you have to take a jump from that to not just believing in a God, someone who made the universe, but actually a God who's personable, who loves us, and who actually came to earth as a man and lived among us and died for our place. And, and we have, these books to go off of, but, it's quite crazy jumps that we're asking someone to make really quickly. And I think it's really important for us to understand that these jumps do not happen all at once. You know what I mean? These jumps don't just pop out at you. We don't have these crazy life-changing religious changes, moral changes, shifts in our mentality. These things are often gradual. And so if there is something that's going on in Joe's mind and his soul, it's going to be something that's gradual, that happens over time. No one makes significant life changes in a day, usually. Usually it is a process of going through experiences, hearing new ideas, whatever, that leads someone to make drastic changes, life-changing alterations in their life. So I want to look up, more specific on the topic, Joe Rogan attending church. I want to see this.
Really? Jesus fucking resurrected from the dead? Well, Romans
Whoa.
and Jewish people, everybody agreed he died, and they buried him in a tomb, and then 3 days later, the tomb's empty, and they say 500 people saw him in the town. 500 independently sourced people saw him. This
But
existed
hold
and this
on.
happened.
But you're talking about historical scholars from 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And their knowledge of science and life and the universe itself was extremely limited. Everything was based on gods and demons and
Okay, so then what about this? What about the 500 people that saw him in the town over the next 6 weeks?
Did you talk to those people?
No.
So
By that, here's the thing, I'm going to close that out, but by that logic, how do we know that a person like Julius Caesar existed? How do we know a person like, we'll just say, Nero, another Roman emperor, existed? How do we know that many of these historical people existed when, they were written about 2,000 plus years ago? And that's the thing, is that argument falls because we obviously do believe those people, and that's the purpose of historic records, of having, things written down. So, and one thing you have to think about the Bible as a religious text, but often when you read it too, it has a lot of historical value as well, especially when you have, 4 different gospels, 4 different books, 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus that will attest to many of the same stories and same events like they were talking about there. And, oh, there's me. Of course there's me. I guess no one's really making videos about this yet, or they're just not popping up. That's really interesting. I thought this would be really big news today. Let me try the filters. Oh, someone has the original Wesley Huff.
Conversation with him.
Well, my conversation with Rogan went 3 hours and 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
It was a little bit longer than this conversation. But yes, Joe Rogan and I have had on and off communication since then. I can tell you for a fact that he is attending a church, and that that has been a consistent thing. And so, things are happening, and he's a very inquisitive individual, and I think for the better, in that he's communicating with me and other people in his life who are influences that can speak into these issues of reliability and trustworthiness and verisimilitude of something like the pages of Scripture. And
interesting.
Where he should and shouldn't be looking for the information in regards to that. So I am very
the biggest lesson some of us need to know: where and where not to look for new information about the Bible.
Encouraged by the communication that I have been able to have with him and others over these last few months in this kind of crazy season that I find myself in. But we're seeing what I don't think is an exaggeration to say somewhat of a resurgence in interest in these topics that we've been talking about, even the nitty-gritty. We had someone who reached out to us recently at Apologetics Canada, who is probably the last bricks and mortar Christian bookstore that I've ever heard of. But they said, we have people walking through our doors asking, young people, teenagers, saying, I want a Bible, all my friends are reading this thing. So if the Bible is, becoming popular with teenagers, then something is happening and the Lord is moving.
Mike.
Yo, so that is just so interesting that is going on, because
for the
one thing I've heard people make the argument about is that Christianity does better under persecution than it does not. So basically that Christianity enters into its best stages, or we become the best at evangelism when we are under persecution. Now, I feel like that needs to be a big wake-up call for us, because Canada has somewhat been under more persecution, not nearly like it has been in the past, not nearly like it is in some countries, but they're entering into a phase where it is unpopular to be a Christian, and in America we're kind of getting to that point. And one thing I've seen with teenagers, just at least in my life, is that they often flock to what's unpopular, but if it has meaning, they will stick to it in their lives. So I think it's quite something to see a resurgence in many teens, even some teens that I know. even teens that I see growing up in Northeast Arkansas, where I'm from, you're seeing them have a faith that they always had, but they're deeper into it than maybe their parents were. They're deeper into it than maybe their grandparents were. That it's more than just a community thing. It's more than something you do just to stay faith, but it's something that you're actually dedicating your life to. That is resurgence. That is a real movement of God that's going on. So I'm excited to hear about that. I want to listen to that one more time from Wesley Huff.
With him.
Well, my conversation with Rogan went 3 hours and 15 minutes.
Oh, my goodness.
It was a little longer than this conversation. But yes, Joe Rogan and I have had on and off communication since then. I can tell you for a fact that he is attending a church, and that that has been a consistent thing. And
that's interesting.
You know, things are happening, and he's a very inquisitive individual.
I just wonder what you would do if you were a pastor and just saw Joe Rogan walk into your church.
And I think for the better, in that he's communicating with me and other people in his life.
I think there might be. I don't know. I wonder if there's like celebrity churches that people can go to that they maybe feel more comfortable in, like that kind of markets itself as like we don't talk about it. We don't talk about celebrity status. You just can come in and you can leave.
Influences that can speak into, you know, these issues of reliability and trustworthiness and verisimilitude of something like the pages of Scripture, and where he should and shouldn't be looking for the information in regards to that.
So important.
So I am very encouraged by the communication that I have been able to have with him and others over these last few months in this kind of crazy season that I find myself in. But we're seeing what I don't think is an exaggeration to say somewhat of a resurgence in interest in these topics that we've been talking about, even the nitty-gritty. We had someone who reached out to us recently at Apologetics Canada, who is probably the last bricks and mortar Christian bookstore that I've ever heard of. But they said, we have people walking through our doors asking, young people, teenagers, saying, I want a Bible, all my friends are reading this thing. So if the Bible is, you know, becoming popular with teenagers, then something is happening and the Lord is moving.
Mike.
Man, crazy. I'm going to end the stream, get some good work done. So I will see you all later. I'm hoping to hear more news about this. I love the work that Wes Huff is doing in the podcast realm right now. So profound, such a smart guy, so cool-headed, so likable. You know, he's not, you know, just someone who's flouting his knowledge and making people feel dumb, but he's actually creating good and meaningful conversation. It's awesome. I'll be praying for Wes. I hope y'all do, and the work that he's doing in the internet realm. Just such incredible work. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Leave me a comment below if you enjoyed this video, and I will post a shorter reaction to the main video later.